No mai, haere mai. Welcome to the Maxim Institute podcast. My name is Jason, and I'm the Communications Manager at Maxim Institute. This is our weekly short-form podcast. These podcasts are released in tandem with our weekly column and are a chance for you to hear in depth from the column's author about some of the thinking that went into producing their final piece. Today we talk to researcher Maryanne Spurdle about her latest column. Maryanne, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Jason.
Good to have you with us talking about your recent column for Maxim, Everyone Pays When Speech Isn't Free. Now, you take as the jumping off point for your column the recent incident at Victoria University where there was supposed to be a panel discussion on free speech, but unfortunately some of the students exercised their right to free speech and now it's kind of changed. Give us a bit of a explainer on that one.
I think it was temporarily cancelled and then it was rescheduled, and in its new format, it's not actually a panel debate.
Okay, so it's not a conversation per se.
I think there's a conversation among some of the original panelists. The most controversial one, ironically, Jonathan Ayling, who heads up the Free Speech Union.
Yes, so on a panel discussion on free speech, the man who represents the Free Speech Union is the controversial one.
Yeah.
Not the people who actually hold different views.
So I think there was supposed to be a predetermined outcome in this debate, according to some of the people.
Yes.
One of the editors of the student magazine was actually outspoken. He wrote an editorial objecting to Jonathan Ayling participating, not because Jonathan had said anything objectionable, but because he supports the right of people who say objectionable things to say it.
So guilt by association.
Yeah. People who should be cancelled, he's not cancelling, so he needs to be cancelled.
So he's not towing the party line in that sense.
From a debate on free speech.
Yeah.
So the new setup, there's going to be, I think, a panel interview, and then it goes to a second stage where academics will discuss what the panel had to say. So I think they've reduced the options for people to actually debate.
Yeah. So it's like it's mostly analysis of what these people said about this thing.
It'll be interesting to see what it turns out to be. Yeah, the university's gone, it look bad if we, I think, cancel it. I think they've recognized that will look bad. So it is going ahead, but they've changed a few things to try to
It would be ironic that
fears.
the university cancels a free speech panel on free speech at a university, which you say in your column is an institution of higher learning, but you say these protesters avoid engaging in the exchange of ideas, which we would normally associate with the university. You go to university, you challenge your preconceived ideas, you introduce to new ideas, you kind of debate and come to resettle some of your thoughts about various things.
Yeah, you're supposed to learn, not just like have your assumptions reinforced.
So kind of what, if they're not engaging in exchange of ideas, what are they engaging in?
The university campuses, not just here, overseas, have been in the news because of protests lately. And everybody's got a right to protest. But the mark of what's been going on, both with the shutting down of the original debate at Vic and with a lot of the protests happening, is that you get a lot of noise, a lot of slogans, but it hasn't been channeled into anything productive. You don't have people coming together and going, look, this is a complex situation. Let's work through those complexities.
Yeah.
It's like the complexities are being blurred into black and white. You are right if you believe this and you are wrong if you don't. And anybody who recognizes that things are problematic from both ends doesn't really have a place to stand and doesn't have a place to speak.
So rather it's more like here's a set of determined values, a list that you have to tick off. Yes, I believe this, I believe that. And if you miss one, that's it, you're the enemy and we're not going to listen to anything you have
tribal.
to say. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you part of our tribe or are you not?
Yeah. And
instead of we're coming at this with different viewpoints. Let's come to a greater understanding of why different people come to different conclusions.
Let's listen to each other. And
there's no room for listening. Well, I mean, you can listen if you want to stand there and listen to what the protesters are chanting.
Yeah.
That's about all the listening.
This is not much articulation of fine points of view. Okay. So that is quite disturbing. You bring up an example of J.K. Rowling in her Twitter controversy, and some of her fans saying, oh, she's just not listening to us. So from one side, they're like, she's just not listening. Yet within the context of some follow-up interviews that she's done and documentaries, you actually understand that she's well-read, that she's actually listened to all sides of the argument. How do we kind of put that across in our conversations? How do we even have, I guess, conversations when one side thinks that the other's not listening, the other side thinks they're not listening, and we're just talking across each other? How do we...
I think the whole example of J.K. Rowling shows that it's kind of impossible to do. In her case, and I wasn't following her closely. I've been following her more as the controversy has ramped up because I've just respected the way that she has graciously stuck to her guns. She's not trying to offend anyone, I don't think. And I had recommended to me this podcast called The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, which is fascinating on a bunch of levels. The woman who's doing the podcast and interviewing J.K. Rowling and people who are criticizing her herself used to be a member of Westboro Baptist Church, which is basically a cult that went around offending, I think they're still around, goes around offending people.
Yeah. In very offensive ways.
She has fascinating things to say about that experience and coming out of that and kind of being so self-reflective now and recognizing that it's hard to know what you can really know because she was so convinced she was right. And now a decade on, she recognizes that she definitely wasn't right about a lot of things. And the fascinating thing about her interaction with J.K. Rowling is in her circles 15, 20 years ago, they were the ones burning Rowling's books and objecting to her, pushing witchcraft on children as they thought.
Those, yeah.
So they were the ones making J.K. Rowling controversial 20 years ago. And now J.K. Rowling's facing the same kind of opposition, but from transgender activists. Not everybody in the community.
Opposite political spectrum, the opposite
side. Yeah, they'd have nothing to do with
Westboro Baptist. Yeah, that's right.
I don't think there's any crossover there, except for piling on J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
They've got that in common, and actually the method of piling on her is the same as well.
Yeah.
So just seeing how whether you're religious or not, this isn't a religion thing. This is a human behavior thing. Are you listening to people you disagree with, or are you trying to shout them down and cancel them? That is the defining behavior. And the people who do try to just cancel the people who they disagree with and say they're not worth listening to, they're never going to come to any kind of harmony with anyone because they're not listening to what they disagree with. They're not actually being able to express what they think because they're just shouting down and canceling. It's just, they're wrong, the end.
So do we have any examples then of people who may have done this listening and thinking and kind of seeking understanding at all?
Thinking through this thing, I was reflecting on just relationships at a micro level. And I think all of us can agree that the relationships that we have that are strongest and most valuable, those are the people we've had difficult and awkward conversations with. It's the people who you have to walk on eggshells around because you might offend them and the feelings might get hurt. You don't really develop deep relationships with them because you can't. So I think anytime you see people, and I can think of examples of people in friendships and politicians in parliament who develop good relationships with people who they disagree with on fundamental things because they respect one another as human beings. I really appreciated James Shaw, who I quoted in this. As he left Parliament, he pointed to the real negative personality-based politics where people try and undermine each other as people rather than focus on the policy positions and argue about how we want to be as a country. So he recognized that that is a problem, just canceling people for, what they think.
Yeah.
And that we need to have a vision for what we want. And he was one of those people who could work with people he disagreed with to find common ground and hash through those issues. And the other one that came to mind that I finished this off with was a woman named Tish Harrison Warren, who wrote a beautiful eulogy for Tim Keller in the New York Times just a year ago after he passed away, and how she witnessed him in a public debate with somebody who was debating it from the secular viewpoint. His opponent kind of fumbled his words and lost his way, and Keller gave him the chance to reword it. He said, is this what you mean? And helped out his opponent, put him in the best possible light before responding to him. And she was just impressed with the way he honored the person he was debating and gave him every opportunity to state his point, because Tim Keller was looking for truth.
Yeah, playing the ball, not the man, right?
He was gracious.
Yeah.
So he didn't want to demean the person he disagreed with. He wanted to respect that person's opinions because he was confident that his own view could stand up to scrutiny and that he had something himself to say. And I think this cheap shortcut to debate, where you plug your ears and don't want to hear what the other person says, that's a sign that you're not sure that what you have to say will cut it. At the end of the day.
Yeah, and when you are confronted with rational, good quality arguments from the opposition, you might crumble.
Yeah, and J.K. Rowling, what she's saying, I mean, if anybody's got credentials for being inclusive and compassionate, she does. Like, her characters have won fans because she's rooting for the underdog. So to assume that she has somehow flipped into this monster without any curiosity as to why she's come to her conclusions shows that people are too afraid to go there. And the question she's asking, I don't agree with her on everything, but I think she's asking some super valid questions that need to be out there. She's coming from a feminist perspective, and what she's asking needs to be responded to. So what happens to women in those spaces if, in sports, for instance, you're now competing against biological men? How do we navigate this so that it's actually fair to women? She's getting counsel for questions like that. They're not responding to her.
Yeah.
And I think everything would be a lot smoother if they was listening to and trying to understand why people are coming from where they're coming from, and then better explaining of people's positions.
Yeah. That respect and, like you say, graciousness towards the other person, seeing them as a person and playing the idea, not the person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not personal. It's people have different ideas. Yeah. That's fine.
That's life.
We should love and respect one another. Yeah.
Well, Maryanne, lots of deep thoughts today. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Jason. While students here and abroad exercise their freedom to speak and protest publicly, some at Victoria University stifled a panel debate on that very topic. Ironically, one of the student magazine's editors considered the participation of Jonathan Ayling, head of the Free Speech Union, the most problematic element. Ayling hadn't said anything cancel-worthy. His belief that others with hateful opinions shouldn't be cancelled disqualified him. In response, the university postponed and reimagined the event. Although these protests are at institutions of higher learning, they avoid engaging in any exchange of ideas. Lopsided sloganeering has generated lots of heat, but no light. A recent Rasmussen report suggests that this noisier-than-thou approach can backfire. Even in, or especially in, a world of sound bites, we desire evidence and reason. Remove these elements of good debate, and people are doomed to talk past one another. Take, for instance, the outrage following J.K. Rowling's gender-critical tweets. For 2 decades, Rowling was celebrated by youth and in LGBTQ circles for creating protagonists who had been marginalized by society. Then in 2020, she disagreed with transgender activists who believed that no spaces, including locker rooms and female sports teams, should be preserved for biological females. Rather than investigate why an ally had reached a different conclusion, many in her community leapt to attack and even threaten her. One disillusioned fan, interviewed on the podcast The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, lamented that Rowling wouldn't just listen to us. Interviews with her, however, reveal she had listened thoroughly before commenting. She remained sympathetic to those she offended. Her perspectives, shaped by experts in the field and by personal experiences of violence, raise important questions that her detractors ignore. Rather than listen and respond, they insist that Rowling has, inexplicably, transitioned into a hateful bigot. Former Green Party co-leader James Shaw lamented in his farewell speech that such attitudes infect public life. He spoke of real negative personality-based politics, where people try and undermine each other as people rather than focus on the policy positions and argue about how we want to be as a country. How do we avoid creating intellectual wastelands inhabited by frustrated souls? Writer Tish Harrison Warren described the antidote when she eulogized author and theologian Tim Keller. She recalled his graciousness in a public debate where his opponent became tongue-tied. Quote, Keller could have chosen to go in for the kill rhetorically and make his opponent look foolish. Instead, he paused and asked, "Is this what you mean?" Keller then restated the secular argument in a clearer, better way, arguing against his own point of view. The other speaker agreed that was what he had meant, and Keller continued, countering the now much stronger point. End quote. She said that Keller was in pursuit of truth and kindness, not point scoring. If we stifle debate, then mudslinging and power-grabbing are all our divided society has left. But if we do the hard, uncomfortable work of testing competing arguments, treating both people and their ideas with respect, we may find both truth and harmony.
Thanks for listening to the Maxim Institute podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us and keep up with the rest of our research and analysis of politics and policy in New Zealand, you can sign up on the homepage of our website to get our monthly forum email and invitations to future Maxim Institute events. You can search and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. From the team at Maxim, mā te wā, goodbye for now.